So welcome to the Smart Cube Musings, which is titled as Me versus and the Machine and Charting My Way Forward. More of reflective. I also have post to this webcast a little sheet that will probably help us to implement some of these ideas. We'll come to that later. So this is not about tools. This is not about frameworks. This is not about future stuff on careers. It's really a bit of a pause and asking ourselves, acting like a mirror. Where am I operating today? What should I be doing next? A typical question that most of us ask at the beginning of a beginning or end of a calendar year. More often, we all reflect the end of the year reflection, right? We always ask ourselves what we did do, what could we do better, where should I be going, and if there's an inflection point, how does that matter to us? And that's it. That was the whole idea of this webcast, so to speak. One of the questions I think all of us are probably being asked is, what should I do now? I mean, there are apparently various things that people suggest. Once upon a time, it was about tools, it's about technology, it's about testing. Now, is it about the AI stuff? Is it about, should I learn AI? Should I automate everything? What is shift left? Should I become a developer? So I guess there is a lot of these standard questions that all of us go through, more so when the technology is going on to an inflection point. And I'm sure there are so many interesting answers that people give, and it's up to us to figure out how to make sense out of some of the answers, because there is no one prescriptive answer, right? But is that the question? Is the bigger thing? Is that the right question? Is an important thing to ask. It's about what should I do now? Is that the question? Or is it something more deeper, which is more internal? And that is, what am I doing? Am I really doing activities, or am I creating value? If I'm doing activities, probably I should be worried. If I'm creating value, then it's a question of asking, could the value be replaced by anybody else, right? We all know that, consider two people who can use the same tools, follow the same process, but each of us can have a wildly different impact. And that's what I gets noticed, right? So it's not just about my skill. It's really about how we operate on the thinking, doing spectrum. So it's about how I think and how I do and how I ultimately deliver quote unquote value, to the business context, right? To the team, the company, to the customers, to society as a whole, the community and society. And therefore, if you were to kind of put it in the larger context, I think it's a spectrum very broadly we talk about as in terms of lower and higher order, in terms of thinking and doing, right? It's not lower or higher is not a judgment of intelligence. It is more like a reflection of our attention and how we can leverage things, right? I mean, we all know that thinking in a way determines what we notice, what you notice, and doing determines how your effort is expended. And both of these have a significant role in how it shapes value to what we do, right? So, for example, a lower order doing may reflect as, I want to do everything by myself. Nothing wrong, and probably interesting in this current era of AI where tools probably help me to do far better. But in a way, higher order doing is also about how I orchestrate, how I amplify, how I delegate to people or machines, right? So we all understand higher order and lower order thinking. I just wanted to kind of put the context of what is higher and lower order doing, so to speak, right? So it's me doing by myself, vis-a-vis orchestrating it with either humans or maybe machines, which I can help amplify as we go forward. So just to put that in the context. So keeping this in mind, the whole idea is to look at, how would I ask, when I ask this question, am I doing activities? Am I delivering value? What should I be doing going forward? So when I was trying to ask that question and say, hey, why do people ask this question? How can we look at the entire process of trying to do self-reflection? And what I could muse about is think on these lines in terms of saying, maybe there are 6 dimensions that I was thinking about. It's like, what is my capability and therefore the depth? How is my doing? That is in my way I do things, execution. How is it largely my approaches? And maybe that's another dimension which shapes my thinking part of it. What is my involvement? When do I get involved as in the context of assurance, so to speak, early, late stage, etc.? When, where? What are the outcomes? I mean, yes, we do activities, we do diligently. What are outcomes? And finally, what is the impact? So I was trying to look at it and saying, hey, maybe there are 6 dimensions and therefore some allied questions that I probably would have, which I could use to reflect and ponder. Right? And these are not really maturity levels. Think of it as different lenses. And it's not that all, any one of us is going to be brilliant in all of them, right? It's situational in some context. So we might be strong on some and maybe not necessarily as strong as we would like in the other. And I think it's perfectly normal. So there's no such thing as this is, lower and higher and level and so on and so forth. So that's why I kind of was cautious about that word, as in more in terms of a dimension, which gives you a sense of altitude, right? And that's what you're trying to look at. So what I'm going to do is just rapidly go through some of these ideas in terms of what these dimensions may mean, and then kind of say, how can I put that together to do a bit of a reflection sheet and therefore see, where am I going? And that could be useful for practitioner at large. So maybe the folks that you work with, the team that you have, and so on, they might find it possibly interesting for them to take that few minutes of reflection, at the end of the year / start of the year, so to speak. So what do we mean by, depth? I think it's fairly straightforward. It's like saying, what can I really do? It's really my capability, right? It's about what can I do when needed? Is it about how well do I understand? How tech savvy I am in terms of awareness that I am? When I say tech savvy, it could be understanding the system as a whole, the architecture, the infrastructure, the APIs, the data, the integration, so to speak, right? The other version is understanding at large in terms of not just the product, in the larger context itself. And then maybe the other word that we're slowly creeping in today, I guess, is a bit of the AI readiness, so to speak. What the heck does that mean? And does that have a bearing on my capability? Could I amplify my capability, or could I exploit the AI to help improve my capabilities, so to speak, right? So that I can use it more like an assistant. And I'm sure that all of us have seen some fairly interesting posts that have been in LinkedIn, where people have talked about how it has been more of an amplifier, orchestrator, assistants, and so on, right? And therefore ask myself from an AI perspective, how do I rate myself? I'm a AI ready guy. I'm an AI experimenting guy. I'm a tool cautious guy, and so on. So the whole idea with this dimension is trying to reflect on the fact, is my capability expanding in terms of my ability to understand, the larger context and the tech savviness in terms of what we do, and then of course, the newer technologies, so to speak. And this is not about titles. It is not about screens. What we're really saying is we are not about just looking at screens and understanding. Right? And ultimately asking the question, AI is not about being threatened or something. It's about saying, how can I exploit it, amplify it wherever it makes sense? So the first dimension of examination, so to speak, is more from my capability, which is really a reflection of my depth, right? The second is not about really the depth. It's about what I actually do, right? It's really my doing part of it, so to speak, right? And that's really about saying, okay, it's like I could have a bunch of tools in the toolbox. I may use some and I may not use some, which simply means I'm not utilizing my full capability, right? Maybe if I were to put it very crudely, so to speak, if you say, look, I have cases and scenarios and checks and probes, what we're really asking is, am I able to, from the context of assurance, how am I actually going through the act of, if you will, assuring, understanding, exploring, etc. And of course, ask the more important question in terms of how much of it is new evaluation or test, vis-a-vis maybe how much of it is redoing some stuff, which is retest or regression and so on. So it is not that we do not have capability. Sometimes we have the capability, but we may not be able to utilize it for various reasons, and that's what you're trying to examine, right? So I might have a certain limited depth, and therefore I may not be able to do sophisticated probing, right? So ultimately, I think at the end of the day, it is not about capability. It is about the ability to do and having the environment be able to do, because that is reality most of the time. So when it comes to lower order and higher order doing, as we broadly talked about, it's really asking ourselves, who's really doing the work? Is it all about me? Is it I just do it all by myself? Vis-a-vis, I get it done with other people, with help of machines in whatever form, right? Intelligent, non-intelligent machines doesn't really matter. But the point here is, how am I able to leverage? How am I able to amplify? And therefore, I think, like what we might have seen earlier, we would look at certain aspects like, am I being efficient? Am I being effective? And so on and so forth. The hidden trap, in a way, for system QA, one of the things that I have always seen is, I might have the capability, I might be doing well, but I'm probably being wasted in terms of sometimes solving the wrong class of problems. What do I mean by that statement? This is just an observation that I've had over many years when I work with people in companies where they are probably doing somebody else's work, where they are looking at lower level issues which are not system QA, so to speak. Should have been done by somebody else, should have been done by earlier, could have been caught earlier, doesn't require depth. But a system QA to a larger degree is about finding emergent, systemic, cross-boundary, more interesting higher order issues and risks. So I just want to put that in the context that sometimes we might be doing everything, but then we are being wasted in areas where our capability is not really required, because we probably do something. So that's something that I need to inject myself on, right? So the real question is, what class of problems deserves your attention? And therefore the reflection is, am I really using my capability and expending my energy in doing these that really matter, that deserves my capability? Moving on to the dimension of 3, which is more like in terms of an approach, So what's my approach? Am I more like a process follower, or I'm more like a creative doer, or am I more like a guy who's creating new practices and therefore is a practice creator, right? And there could be more of these. I've just thought I could put up about 3. So please don't take anything of these as necessarily complete. I'm sure that we could expand, adjust. I could also look at it from, okay, am I just a finder of an issue? Am I an investigator? Am I a suggester? Am I an advisor? So what's the role? What's the approach? How do I show up when I work, right? And that's the other notion in terms of the approach, which determines how I react to work or how I shape the work. And frankly, you don't need any permission to evolve this approach, because I think as we go higher, we end up doing interesting things and probably adding more value. But what I need to be cognizant of is being aware as to what my approach is. So there is a capability that I have, there is an execution of doing whatever, and then the approach that I take to do this particular stuff. And then comes naturally my involvement. So when do I get involved? Because we're talking about assurance at large. We all use this word, left, shift left, and so on and so forth, meaning early, trying to find, prevent, trying to add value in the earlier stuff, and so on. So the question then is, where is my involvement, and how is that involvement shaping up into higher value? We'll always talk about shift left, right? But I also think that the shift right is interesting and useful. And what I mean by that shift right is learning from real issues, being more aware of the market, getting to know customers better, getting to know trends. And therefore, you are not just looking at it from a product and a validation. You are obviously going out to, how it is being used, deployed, valued, and what does it mean to the organization itself, the customer and the producer, so to speak, right? So that's why I put it as the last one is more of a production learning. So one of them is related to shift left, another one is related to shift right. And both, if there is a bit of a harmonious tension between them, it's beautiful, because then my involvement is not limited to, in a way, the act of assuring a little late or in the middle. It is more like right in the front, and also being very sensitive to what I learned from the right. And therefore, my involvement is much more fuller, if you will, right? So We all know that shift left alone could be sometimes incomplete, because with shift right, you learn from reality. And I think the notion of sophistication in terms of quality lives between the two edges of anticipation on one edge, the feedback on the other edge, right, which is left and right. The fifth dimension is really about, okay, I might involve early, late, I might learn from the right, I might be early, I might have the capability, I might do well, I might have a great approach. What's the outcome? Right? And that's where I think, things like, am I efficient? Am I effective? Am I consistent? Which are more like attributes come into play. That is one part of the system. The second part in terms of outcomes is more in terms of not system attribute outcomes, but more in terms of what does it mean to the product? What does it mean to the users of the product? What does it mean to the customers who have the users who use the product, and therefore the value, one, to the customer, and second, to the producer, as in terms of monetary benefits, business benefits, brand benefits, and so on. So really, we are looking at it from a very outward perspective. What am I really delivering? Because it's not just about finding issues or putting suggestions. How does it change certain meaningful things to the organization that we work with, the customers who use it, and of course, at a higher order, the sixth dimension that we will get into is impact to the community and society at large. And that's the last possible dimension in some sense of the impact is in terms of who benefits. Is it me? Am I getting better? Am I becoming more skilled? Am I becoming more capable? Or is it my team as a whole? So it can be the impact as in terms of what we normally call it as the leadership notion, right? I'm in the center, I have ripple effects all around, and therefore I'm more of a leader. So it's me, my team, the community at large. And this community could be anything. It could be the test community, it could be the business community, whatever, right? Think of it that way. So what we're really asking here is, where is my impact that I need? So along these 6 dimensions, I'm trying to ask myself some interesting, simple questions, and then find out what could be things that I could do better and look forward to, and therefore not ask the question, what should I be doing in terms of I'm lost? You probably know anyway. Yeah, and we all know that things morph with time. So in a way, if you were to think of it, these are lenses. Because we are engineers, we like to put it as 6 dimensions and put a radar chart, etc., etc. But really, there isn't a statement which says, here is this dimension that defines you. I guess it's just about, at this point in time, this is how the picture looks, and this is what I want to move into, and that's probably good enough for me. And there is no such thing as right or wrong, or this is the ideal notion, etc. And there's no labeling that is required, right? All it means is within within me as an individual, to me, what I want to go forward. Maybe these 6 dimensions, when I'm able to look at, it gives me a certain characteristic, a certain picture of myself, and that's what I am. So there's no right, wrong in this entire piece. And therefore, this is more like an end of the year mirror. And the 3 questions that I thought I'd probably ask myself is, well, because there is new technology, new stuff, the natural question, how AI ready am I? What does it mean? Right? Am I doing work that demands my capability? So am I being exploited well? Am I actually using my abilities well? Lastly, of course, is there anything that is actually I do have, probably I'm being wasted, right? And that's more like a very simple mirror that I'm asking myself. Because at the end of the day, we all know that it is not about just defects. I mean, yeah, that's probably what testing seems to indicate, but we all know, we all understand that it is really about value. Defects are just signals. Value is really the intent, and the practice is the bridge between the defects and the value. We are not abandoning defects and trying to be esoteric and philosophical. It is just that we are constantly listening to them, because that's probably what we are trained to do most often. Any aberration, so to speak. And therefore, we are looking beyond them, and that's what probably ends up shining, right? And so, when we choose, for example, what we want to do, it's not that we want to do everything, because we all have finiteness in terms of effort, time. We just want to do what you think is right. So is it maybe build depth when needed, maybe elevate the doing so that you get leverage, maybe move some attention upstream, maybe share to multiply the impact, and each of us do it in different ways. And truly, growth itself is not about doing more, right? It's not about saying, oh, I'm growing because I'm adding more. Growth is probably as much as adding and deleting and adjusting, right? It's about really doing what matters and being at the right altitude. And that altitude is very personal in nature. And therefore, the question I'm going to leave you with is, which altitude will you choose to inhabit in 2025, or rather 2026? I think I made a mistake. I'm still living in the current year. Yes, I am, but I think this is meant for next year. So it's really about, trying to be more aware before we're getting to act. It's about reflecting before we make a resolution, so to speak. And therefore, it's not about the question of what AI will do or anything else external that we will do. The question about what I am going to choose to help me grow, help my teams grow, help my folks grow, and so on and so forth. So this is what I wanted to share, but I wanted to share, also a small PDF so that you might find useful and your team may find useful, and which I will certainly share with you. But a summary of that is what I'm here. So it's like a small 6-box assessment where you take, it's highly personal, so obviously there's nothing complicated about it, but just to give you a little perspective of what it is, it's got this as just a tiny little form. Not that I'm expecting you to read it because it's going to be dense, but all I wanted to kind of give you is, hey, it's got part 1 and 2, which is about how I work, and the part 2 is how it matters, and part 1 is really about what we talked about: my depth, which is capability; my doing, which is actions and execution; my approach, which is the way I look at it. And the form, the box, it looks like is with respect to a depth. It simply says, hey, what can I do when needed? It puts you over 3 boxes. You can tick it, right? And I'm sure you will have a reflection which you can add. Is my capability expanding or quietly becoming a ceiling? It's your call. You will write whatever descriptive text that mirrors you. And that's hopefully something that your takeaway is. So these are just kind of hints to help you ponder on, my depth, my doing, my approach. And if you look at it here, it's part 2 is about why it matters. So what is my involvement? The notion of left and right and reflection, the outcomes as in terms of what we talked about, in terms of quality of outcomes, the focus of the primary focus that I have, and so on. And finally, of course, when we look at the impact, we really have to pause and ask, am I spending time finding issues which are lower order, which your personal judgment, right? And finally, of course, is a composite picture that you evolve. Looking across these, you ask yourself, how do you operate, right? And this is not intended to make you sad or happy, or it is just, it's just kind of an honest reflection, and hopefully you benefit from it, right? And then, of course, I'm sure you have, this is just suggestive in terms of intent. I guess it should have been again named as 2026, truly speaking, but you get the idea. But it's about saying, what is my intent? I just put some of them up here. And then you want to convert it into a bit of an affirmation, you're most welcome to convert it into a one-liner, right? So as a closing thought, yeah, obviously we all seem to think that any fundamentally deterministic late-stage individual work is probably going to be chewed up by some machines and technologies. What we seem to think right now, that's what the work indicates. But we also appreciate the fact that anything that is ambiguous, anything that is early, anything that is systemic, AI could probably help us amplify some of those. And therefore, we might be more ready to deal with those. And we all know that, ambiguous work, ideating work is probably a skill and an action that is valued much more. And therefore, at the end, the closing thought really is about, growth begins by knowing where you truly stand. I mean, this is just, the sheet is just a set of ideas, and I'm sure you have more interesting ones. You could add few, but I just wanted to be as concise and simple as it is. And it's obviously in the line of smart QA and what it means. And smart QA is not about me individually becoming smarter. It's also exploiting smartness with whatever assistance from people and machines and as appropriate. Also culling out what is stupid. Right? It's also equally important to do that. With that, of course, that's what I do. I'm not going to mess around anymore on this hypothesis, blah, blah. But the idea here is to kind of look at it from, am I getting probing smarter, seeing deeper, assuring better, adding more value, right here to myself and the world at large. So with that, I want to thank you for listening, spending some time today on listening to these musings, which is a slightly different one.